My name is Claire Donovan and I'm 32 years old. 9 days ago, I stood in a funeral home in Portland, Oregon, wearing my mother's pearl earrings because they were the only thing of hers I still had access to, and I watched 200 people cry over a woman who spent the last 3 years of her life making mine smaller. My mom was Diane Donovan. She built Donovan Home Care from nothing, a single van, a list of 12 elderly clients, and a conviction that aging people deserve dignity. Over 22 years, she turned it into a regional agency with 43 employees, contracts with 4 hospital systems, and a portfolio of 3 residential care properties in the Portland metro area. The business was valued at roughly $4 million. The house in Lake Oswego, the one where I grew up, where I learned to ride a bike in the driveway and burned my first batch of cookies in the kitchen, was worth another $800,000. She left it all to my stepfather. All of it. Every account, every property, every share of the business she'd built before he ever existed. His name is Glenn. Glenn Marsh. He married my mother 4 years ago at a small ceremony I wasn't invited to plan, on a beach in Cannon Beach I'd never been to with her, surrounded by people I barely knew. He's 58. He was a mid-level sales manager at a medical supply company when they met. He had a truck, a timeshare in Scottsdale, and a habit of making everything about himself at dinner. I found out about the will the same way I found out she'd been sick for the last 8 months. Late, and second-hand, from someone who assumed I already knew. The reading was in a conference room at her estate attorney's office in downtown Portland. Gray skies outside, coffee that had been sitting too long. Glenn arrived in a new jacket I didn't recognize. He sat across from me, and the whole time the attorney was reading, he had this expression that wasn't exactly a smile, but wasn't not a smile either. Satisfied. Like a man who had already done the math, the attorney read the provisions. The house to Glenn. The business, 100% to Glenn. The residential care properties to Glenn. Personal savings, to Glenn. To me, the contents of a storage unit in Beaverton, containing my mother's personal mementos, and a note from her attorney that a separate trust existed in my name. Details to be provided by a Ms. Elaine Hartwell of Hartwell Estate Solutions. I had never heard of Elaine Hartwell, of Hartwell Estate Solutions. I had never heard of Elaine Hartwell. I sat there after Glenn had already gathered his copies and left, already on his phone in the parking lot. I sat there and I tried to remember the last real conversation I'd had with my mother. It was over a year ago. She'd told me Glenn didn't like how much time she spent worrying about me. She said she needed some peace. I'd driven home from that visit with the windows down in November, crying hard enough that I had to pull over twice. Her oldest friend, a woman named June who'd been her college roommate and her bookkeeper for 15 years, touched my arm on her way out of the conference room. She loved you, June said. She just got very confused near the end. I didn't know what that meant, not then. That night I went to the storage unit. It smelled like cedar and cardboard. There were boxes of old photos, my mom's recipe binders, some of her gardening books, a ceramic bowl she'd made in a pottery class in the 90s. At the bottom of a box, I found a birthday card she'd written me 2 years ago and never mailed. Her handwriting. I sat on the concrete floor of that storage unit and read it 4 times, and then put it in my coat pocket and drove back to my apartment. I work as a hospice care coordinator. I'd spent that entire week helping other families navigate the deaths of their loved ones. I'd held a son's hand in a hospital hallway and coached him through what would happen next. I'd gone home every night and sat in the dark and didn't know how to do the same things for myself. Day 2 after the reading, Glenn sent me a text. It said, "Your mom mentioned you might want to go through some things at the house. I'm having the spare bedroom cleared out by Friday, so if you want to come before then, that works. Otherwise, the stuff gets donated." The spare bedroom. The room I'd slept in every night of my childhood. I went on Thursday. Glenn wasn't there. He left a key under the mat, which struck me as both lazy and deliberate. I walked through the house and it was already different. New throw pillows on the couch. Her reading chair moved to face the TV instead of the window. The herb garden on the back deck was dry and brown. She'd tended that garden every weekend. The spare bedroom had been stripped. My old bookshelf was gone. The photos she kept on the dresser, my college graduation, the two of us at Crater Lake the summer I turned 25, were stacked in a cardboard box on the floor with a post-it that said, "Claire's stuff." I took the box. I took the box. I took the birthday card she never sent. I took nothing else because nothing else was mine anymore. Day 3, June called me. "I need to tell you something," she said. "About the business." We met at a coffee shop in Northeast Portland. June is 61, practical, unsentimental in the way that people who've spent decades keeping other people's finances often are. She ordered plain black coffee and pulled out a folder. "I'm still the bookkeeper," she said. "At least until Glenn figures out how to replace me, so I see everything." She opened the folder to a spreadsheet. "The business is valued at $4 million on paper. But look at the liabilities." I leaned in. 2 commercial loans totaling $1.2 million. A line of credit at $340,000. Outstanding payroll tax from a delayed filing 8 months ago. Glenn had apparently convinced your mom to push it back. "The actual net," June said, pointing to a number at the bottom, "is closer to $2.3 million, not 4. Does he know that?" June looked at me over her coffee cup. "He hasn't asked to see a balance sheet yet. He heard 4 million and started talking about selling. Selling. 43 employees. Families relying on those caregivers. Elderly clients who knew the names of their aides, who had routines built around specific people who showed up every Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday. He can just sell it?" "That's what I need to talk to you about," June said. She closed the folder. "Your mother filed something 18 months ago. A business operating agreement amendment. I helped her prepare it, but I don't know the full details. She said it was handled by someone else, a separate attorney. Hartwell, I think. Elaine Hartwell." I called the number on the card the estate attorney had given me before I'd even finished my coffee. The meeting with Elaine Hartwell was on day 6. Her office was in a converted Victorian on the west side, the kind of building that looks like it's been there forever, and is comfortable with that. She was in her mid-50s, unhurried, with reading glasses on a chain and the manner of someone who has navigated a great many difficult situations without losing her composure once. She poured tea. She sat across from me. She said, "Your mother was a very thoughtful woman." She opened a folder that was substantially thicker than I expected. 18 months ago, Elaine said, "Your mother retained me to draft an amendment to the operating agreement of Donovan Home Care LLC. She also established the Marguerite Fund, named for her mother, your grandmother, a charitable trust focused on funding paid bereavement leave for home care workers across Oregon." I had not heard of the Marguerite Fund. Your mother spent her career watching her employees lose income every time someone they loved died. Caregivers who couldn't afford to take time off to bury their own parents. She wanted to change that. She established the trust with a seed donation and structured the business operating agreement so that the trust becomes the controlling beneficiary of the LLC under certain conditions. What conditions? Elaine turned to a flagged page. Section 6.2. Upon the death of the founding member, business ownership transfers to Glenn Marsh as specified in the will, but only if the surviving spouse demonstrates sustained good faith stewardship of the business, defined in Section 6.3. She turned to the next section. Section 6.3. Sustained good faith stewardship includes maintaining existing employment contracts for a minimum of 90 days following the member's death, refraining from initiating sale negotiations without consent of the Employee Advisory Board, maintaining existing client care contracts, and, she looked up at me, treating the decedent's children with basic dignity and respect, including reasonable access to personal property and family keepsakes. I felt something shift in my chest. "The storage unit," I said. "The storage unit," Elaine confirmed. "Your mother anticipated that Glenn would try to limit your access. She had already designated certain personal items as yours, legally, and any interference with that access constitutes a breach. He texted me I had 4 days to come get things from my childhood bedroom before he donated them." Elaine wrote something down without looking up. "That's useful. There's a monitoring period," she continued. 90 days from the date of death. I document his behavior. If he satisfies the conditions, he keeps full ownership. If he breaches them, the Marguerite Fund assumes controlling interest in the LLC, and you are named executive director. Me. Your mother's words were, Claire knows what this business is supposed to be. Glenn knows what it's worth. Those are not the same thing. I couldn't speak for a moment. I looked at the window. Portland gray outside, rain just beginning. She built this, I said, while she was sick. She was diagnosed 14 months ago. She spent the first 2 months getting her affairs in order. The operating agreement was filed on the third month. 14 months. She'd known for 14 months and I hadn't known, and she'd spent that time building a legal structure to protect the people who depended on her, even from the person she'd married. Why didn't she just leave it to me directly? Elaine was quiet for a moment. I asked her that. She said she wasn't sure you'd want it. She said you'd built your own life, your own career. She didn't want to force a responsibility on you, but she wanted you protected, and she wanted the people who worked for her protected. She paused. She also said, and I'm quoting, "If Glenn is who I hope he is, he'll steward this well and Claire won't need any of this. And if he isn't, then she'll know exactly what to do." I drove home from that office slowly, in the rain with all 4 windows up, and I let myself cry in a way I hadn't since she died. Not from grief this time, from being seen. From the feeling of a hand reaching across time and squeezing mine. She knew. She'd always known. Day 8. June called me. He's meeting with the business broker tomorrow. One of our hospital contract partners mentioned it. I took a breath. Document it. Already on it. Day 10. Glenn posted on Facebook a photo of him at a Blazers game, courtside seats, tagged with 3 people I didn't know. Caption, celebrating new chapters. My mother had been dead for 10 days. June screenshotted it and texted it to me with no commentary. She didn't need to add any. Day 12. Glenn sent an email to the Employee Advisory Board, a structure my mother had established 5 years ago to give her senior caregivers a voice in company decisions. The email said the board was being restructured, and that he would be in touch about new meeting formats. The board had not been consulted. One of the senior caregivers, a woman named Rosa who had worked for my mother for 11 years, called June in tears. "He's trying to dissolve us," Rosa said. "So he doesn't need our approval to sell." June forwarded the email to Elaine. Elaine's response, breach number 7, thank you. Day 15. June pulled me aside when I came in to sign some transition paperwork. She had that expression I'd come to recognize. The particular stillness of someone trying not to show how angry they are. "He's been using the company card," she said. "For what?" She pulled up the statements. A hotel in Scottsdale. Dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of. A car service. 3 charges at what appeared to be a furniture store. He charged furniture to the business. $11,000. Said it was office upgrades. The offices haven't changed. I thought about the 43 employees who got their direct deposit every other Friday because my mother had kept her books tight for 22 years. I thought about the clients. The Mrs. Hendersons and Mr. Term, Garcias of the world, who depended on those employees showing up. My mom ran this company for 22 years and never once expensed a hotel in Scottsdale. She barely expensed her own mileage, June said quietly. Day 17. Elaine called me. He's been in contact with a private equity firm in Seattle. They specialize in acquiring regional home care agencies and consolidating them. Standard practice is to renegotiate all employee contracts within 60 days of acquisition and eliminate seniority pay structures, meaning the people who've been there 10, 15 years would likely be replaced by cheaper newer hires or independent contractors with no benefits. I sat with that. The people who'd built something with my mother. Who'd shown up every day because they believed in what she'd built. How many violations do we have? 19 documented. The employee board email alone is significant. It's a direct attempt to circumvent the operating agreement's consent requirement, combined with the business broker meeting, the fraudulent expense charges, and the restriction of your access to personal property. We have more than enough to trigger a finding. But you're waiting. 90 days is cleaner, but I want to talk to you about day 60 if that's okay. Day 20. Glenn stopped returning June's calls. He hired an outside accounting firm, one she didn't know, to conduct what he called an independent valuation. He didn't tell June. She found out when someone from the outside firm came to pick up files. She texted me, "He's trying to establish a new valuation before the sale, probably to make the number look higher." Day 22. Rosa called me directly. "Ms. Donovan, I don't know who else to call. He came into the office today and told 3 of our most senior aides that their positions were being evaluated for redundancy. 2 of them have been here for over 8 years. They came to this company because of your mom, because she treated people like people. I thought about my mom, 22 years ago, driving that first van herself, because she couldn't yet afford to pay someone else to do it." "Rosa," I said, "keep documenting. Dates, what was said, who was present, send it to June." "Can you do that?" "I'll do it tonight." Day 25. Elaine called. 29 violations. The redundancy conversations with senior employees are the most significant. That's a direct breach of the employment maintenance clause. I'm ready to move when you are. Day 60, I said. Day 60. Day 28. I visited one of the residential care properties, a small group home in southeast Portland where 4 adults with cognitive disabilities lived with round-the-clock support. My mom had acquired it 6 years ago when the previous owner was going to sell to a developer. She'd kept the same staff, kept the same routines, kept the rent structured to what the residents' support payments could actually cover. The house manager, a man named Arthur, met me at the door. He'd worked there for 9 years. "We heard there might be changes coming," he said. He didn't say it like a question. He said it like someone who'd been bracing. "I'm working on it," I said. He nodded slowly. "Your mom came every month." "Just to visit, not for any business reason. She'd bring cookies and sit in the living room and just be there." The residents asked about her last week. I didn't know what to tell them. "I stayed for an hour. I sat in the living room. I didn't bring cookies, but I sat there and I let it matter." Day 33. Glenn made a formal offer to the private equity firm. June got wind of it through one of the hospital contract liaisons, who had received a preliminary inquiry about whether the contract would survive a change of ownership. The liaison called June because they'd worked together for 6 years and she wanted to give them a heads up. June called Elaine. Elaine documented it. Breach 34. Day 35. Glenn posted again on Facebook. This time, a photo of him at a restaurant in Napa Valley. He'd been there for a long weekend while 2 of his company's senior employees were wondering whether they still had jobs. The comments were not kind. Several were from people who knew my mother. Day 38. I found the letter. It was in the storage unit, in the bottom of a box I hadn't opened yet. A sealed envelope with my name on it, in my mother's handwriting with a note paper clipped to the outside that said, "Give this to Claire after things are settled." It had been tucked under her recipe binders, placed there by someone who knew I'd eventually go back for the things I'd missed the first time. I sat in the storage unit on a folding chair and opened it. Her handwriting was shaky in a way it hadn't been before she got sick. "Claire, by the time you're reading this, you probably know most of what I did. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was still here. I wanted to. I just didn't know how to ask you to carry this while I was still alive to see you struggling with it. You have always carried too much. That was my fault. I let you grow up too independent because I was proud of you and not because I was thinking about what you needed. I want you to know that everything I built for people. The aides, the clients, people who needed someone to show up. You understand that better than anyone I have ever known. The business was never meant to be an asset. It was meant to be a promise. I'm asking you to keep it. Mom." I stayed in that storage unit for a long time. Day 42. Elaine called a meeting. Glenn, his attorney, a real estate lawyer from Lake Oswego, Elaine, and me. The conference room was in Elaine's office. Rain again. Portland does not offer a lot of sunshine for dramatic moments. Glenn arrived with his attorney and the energy of someone who expected this to be an inconvenience. He sat down, glanced at me briefly, and turned to Elaine. My client understands there's some document that needs to be addressed. There is, Elaine said. Thank you for coming. She opened the folder and slid a document across the table. This is the operating agreement amendment for Donovan Home Care LLC, filed with the Oregon Secretary of State 17 months ago. Glenn's attorney picked it up, started reading. His expression was professionally neutral for about 30 seconds, and then it wasn't. Elaine let the silence sit. Section 6.2, she said. Upon the death of the founding member, controlling interest in the LLC shall transfer to the Marguerite Fund unless the surviving spouse demonstrates sustained good faith stewardship as defined in Section 6.3. Glenn looked up. The will said I inherit. The will governs personal assets, Elaine said. Oregon law is clear on LLC operating agreements. The operating agreement supersedes the will with respect to business assets, your attorney can confirm. Glenn's attorney was already flipping through the document. He'd gone quiet in a specific way that meant he was recalibrating. The conditions, Elaine continued, and she began to read them. Employment maintenance. Client contract maintenance. Advisory board consent for sale negotiations. And, she looked at Glenn, basic dignity and respect for the decedent's children, including reasonable access to personal property. She slid a printed text message across the table. Glenn's text to me. Your mom mentioned you might want to go through some things at the house. I'm having the spare bedroom cleared out by Friday, so if you want to come before then that works, otherwise the stuff gets donated. Sent 8 days after my mother's death. This was breach number 1, Elaine said. We have 38 more. She set a binder on the table. It was 2 inches thick. Glenn's attorney was very still now. Facebook posts, Elaine said. Courtside Blazers tickets, a Napa Valley weekend, posted publicly while senior employees were told their positions were under review. Slide. $11,000 of personal expenses charged to the company card. Slide. An unauthorized attempt to dissolve the Employee Advisory Board by email without consent in direct violation of Section 6.3. Slide. Formal contact with a private equity firm to initiate acquisition discussions without board approval. Slide. Verbal notification to 3 senior employees of pending redundancy evaluations, violating the 90-day employment maintenance clause. Each document landed on the table. Glenn's jaw was tight. His attorney turned to him and said, quietly enough that I almost didn't hear, "We need to talk." Glenn said, "No. I want to hear what she thinks she's offering." Elaine folded her hands. At 11:59 tonight, the Marguerite Fund assumes controlling interest in Donovan Home Care LLC, per Section 6.2. That is not negotiable. What is negotiable is how we arrive there. She opened the last folder, 2 pages, labeled Option A and Option B. Option A. And Option A. You sign a transfer of your interest in the LLC today. You retain the Lake Oswego house, free and clear. It is not part of the LLC, and the will's provision stands. You retain your personal savings and personal property. You sign a standard non-disparagement agreement. In exchange, the fund will not pursue recovery of the $11,000 in improper business expenses, will not file a complaint with the Oregon Department of Consumer and Business Services regarding the operating agreement violations, and will not share the documentation we have compiled with the individuals and families currently reviewing his company's public profiles. Glenn looked at the second page. And Option B? Option B. You retain your inherited interest in the LLC, which transfers to the fund at midnight tonight regardless. You retain the house and the personal savings, same as Option A. You decline to sign. We filed the DCBS complaint Monday. The expense fraud documentation goes to the outside accounting firm he hired to conduct the valuation and to the hospital contract partners who are currently reconsidering their relationship with the agency, pending clarity on ownership. Every breach in this binder becomes part of the public record. The Facebook posts, the texts, the private equity negotiations conducted while Rosa was trying to figure out whether she still had health insurance. Silence. Glenn looked at me. It was the first time since this whole thing started that he looked at me like I was actually in the room. You did this. I didn't do anything, I said. You did this. My mother anticipated it. He laughed, a short, hollow sound. She always thought she was smarter than everyone. She was, I said. And I said it without cruelty because it was just true. His attorney touched his arm. Take option A. Glenn was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the pen. After they left, I sat in the conference room and looked at the rain on the window. What happens now? I asked. Tonight, the fund becomes controlling beneficiary, Elaine said. Tomorrow, you call Rosa. I did. I called Rosa at 8 in the morning and I told her what had happened, and she was quiet for a second and then she started crying. Not sad crying. The other kind. Your mom, she said. She planned this. She planned this. She planned this. We knew something was different about that operating agreement. She came in one day and asked all of us to sign a document, and she said it was just a routine update, and she had this look on her face. Rosa laughed through the tears. She had this look like she knew something we didn't. She usually did. Over the next few months, I learned what it meant to run a business. I had no plan to run. I learned payroll cycles and contract renewals, and how to chair an advisory board meeting, and when to defer to people who'd been doing this longer than I had. June taught me the financials. Rosa walked me through the care operations side by side. Arthur drove me to all 3 residential properties on a Saturday and introduced me to every resident and every staff member by name. I was a hospice care coordinator, not a business owner. I'd spent my career walking people through endings. This felt, surprisingly, like a beginning. The first thing I did as executive director was restore the positions of the 3 senior employees who'd been told they were being evaluated for redundancy. The second thing I did was have the advisory board formally ratified, with Rosa as chair. The third thing I did was establish the Marguerite Fund's first grant cycle. Paid bereavement leave, 2 weeks fully funded, for any home care worker in Oregon who lost an immediate family member. It was what my mother had wanted to do for 20 years, and hadn't found the right structure for until she was running out of time. 6 months after she died, I drove to the cemetery on a Tuesday afternoon. She was buried in a quiet section of a cemetery in Lake Oswego, near the end of a row, with a view of a small pond. She picked the spot herself, according to the funeral home. She always liked water. I brought flowers. The same kind she grew in the herb garden before Glenn stopped watering it. I sat on the grass next to her headstone, and I talked to her for a long time. I told her about Rosa and the advisory board. I told her about Arthur and the residents and the way the house in Southeast Portland smelled like coffee cake on Saturday mornings. I told her about the first bereavement grant recipients. 14 caregivers in the first cycle. 14 people who could take 2 weeks off and not have to choose between grief and rent. I told her I'd found the letter. I told her I'd understood, finally, why she hadn't told me she was sick. She wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting me from watching her build something while she was dying and not being able to do anything to help. She knew I would have tried to carry it with her. She knew I would have shown up with plans and spreadsheets and good intentions and absolutely wrecked myself in the process. She knew me. I'm keeping the promise, I told her headstone. Not because it's yours. Because it's right. The pond was still. The sky was that particular Oregon gray that isn't sad, just steady. I thought about Glenn, somewhere in the Lake Oswego house, in the life he'd grabbed so fast he hadn't stopped to see what it actually required. Last I heard from June, he'd been trying to refinance the house and was running into the same problem as Skrull, as anyone does when their income doesn't match their lifestyle. I didn't wish him badly. I genuinely didn't. But I noticed I didn't wish him anything at all, which felt like its own kind of peace. The morning I'd officially taken over the executive director role, I'd sat in my mother's office, my office now, and found, pinned to the corkboard behind the desk under a year's worth of sticky notes, a handwritten index card in her writing. I recognized the handwriting from the birthday card she'd never sent me. Same shaky pen, same careful letters. The card said, "A business is only as good as the people who show up." She'd been saying that for as long as I could remember. I thought it was about clients. Now I understood she was talking about something larger. about who shows up when it costs them something, about what you build and who you build it for and what happens when you're gone and the structure you made either holds or it doesn't. My mother built on something that held. What are you building on? Because the people around you are watching. The ones you're kind to and the ones you dismiss. The ones you call back and the ones you leave on read. The ones who show up to your mother's funeral and the ones who don't. Character is a structure. You build it one choice at a time. She built hers over 22 years. Every Friday paycheck she made sure cleared. Every client visit she remembered. Every aide she called by name. I'm still learning how to build mine, but I show up, and I think that's where it starts. I used to think my mother was too trusting, that she saw the best in people past the point where it was reasonable. She married Glenn, after all, a man who brought nothing to that relationship except charm and availability, and she gave him 4 years and her last name and eventually her entire estate on paper. For a long time, I held that against her. I thought it was a failure of judgment. I don't think that anymore. What she actually did was something I didn't have the language for until I was sitting in Elaine's office on day 6, holding a document that my mother had quietly filed while she was going through chemotherapy. She had known exactly who Glenn was, she had seen it clearly. And instead of fighting it, instead of cutting him out and sparking a conflict she didn't have the energy for, she built something. Quietly. Carefully. In a way that wouldn't activate unless it needed to. That's not naivety. That's a particular kind of intelligence that doesn't get enough credit, the kind that plays a long game while everyone else assumes you're not playing at all. I think about Glenn a lot, actually, not with bitterness, but with something closer to a sad kind of clarity. He walked into that inheritance and saw an asset, a number, a thing to be liquefied and moved into his own life. He never once asked what the business was for. He never visited the group home in Southeast Portland. He never learned Rose's last name. He made 43 people's livelihoods feel temporary while he was posting vacation photos online, and he did all of it without what I think is the most basic form of intelligence, the ability to ask, what did this person actually build, and why? That question would have saved him everything. If he'd just sat down with June in the first week and looked at the balance sheet, asked what the hospital contracts required, gone to one advisory board meeting and listened, the operating agreement conditions would have been satisfied. He would have kept it all. My mother had built in that possibility deliberately. She wanted him to have the chance to be better than she suspected he was. He didn't take it. And that's the thing about character. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in the small decisions, the ones that feel low stakes at the time. The text message you send 8 days after your wife dies, telling her daughter she has until Friday. The Facebook post from a basketball game while your employees are scared. The furniture charge to a company card because no one's watching yet. Every one of those choices was a brick, and Glenn laid them himself, and by the time he sat down in that conference room across from Elaine's 2-inch binder, he had already built the structure that buried him. My mother built something that held because she built it out of the right materials. 22 years of showing up, knowing her employees' names, keeping an old woman's rent low because it was the right thing to do. That's not sentiment, that's a foundation. And when the pressure came, and it always comes, hers held, and his didn't. I'm not a natural business owner, I'm still learning. I still call Rosa when I don't know what to do, which is often. But I show up. I ask the right questions. I try to make decisions my mother would recognize. That's all any of us can really do. Build carefully, choose well, and trust that the structures we make in good faith will hold long after we're not around to defend them.